Hi, my name's Holly, and this video is going to be my best and my worst or most disappointing books of 2019. I want to start off with the books that either I disliked the most or that I found most disappointing, the general spiel. It's just my opinion. These aren't books that necessarily came out this year, but just ones that I read this year. These books are in no particular order. I just found all of them either really bad or disappointing. And so the first book on this list of not so great books was actually the sequel to The Call by, I believe it's Peador or Gwilym, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. The sequel was called The Invasion. I really enjoyed the first book. It was a fun book about this crazy ass world where Ireland is like, I believe it's all of Ireland, is like secluded from the rest of the world and nobody can leave, and people between, like, in their youth, given the call where they are pulled from their realm and into a sort of fae, very dark, classic, the people realm, where these fae creatures are dark and twisted and cruel, and they have to survive the equivalent of 24 hours in this world. I think I gave it like 4 or 5 stars. I really liked it. So when the sequel came out, following in this world, and her after the call, I was so excited to see what was going to happen next, what the next overarching plot thing was, and I think this was a duology. I don't even know. I blocked most of what happened in the second book. It was just so dull. Like, nothing interesting happened. I was not captivated by anything. I was bored to tears through the entire thing, and I kind of wish I had just DNF'd it. And it sort of put a sour taste on the first book a little bit for me. I still really enjoyed the first book. I think people should read the first one, but I do not think you need to continue on after that. The next book on this list, I believe there's 5 in total. 5 books on this list. So number 2 on this list was by Johanna Hedva, and it was called On Hell. I don't have a copy of it. I found it at my local library. It was this tiny little book, and it was entirely pink. Like, even the pages were pink. It looked really cool. I think it was like indie published or maybe self-published or something. It was just such a cool book, and it was like not even 100 pages. It was this teeny tiny thing. I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna give this a try. It looks weird. And it was so bad. It was like try-hard, experimental, postmodern garbage. It was gibberish half the time. Honestly, I read it because I was determined to finish it because it was such a short book. It was just bad. Like, I don't even care. It was bad. I hated it. It was shit. I think I gave it 1 star. I suffered through it. Maybe I missed something that was bigger or deeper, but I don't think I did. There were some, like, conversations or topics in there that are heavy, but, like, it didn't do anything with them. It name dropped stuff. It wasn't powerful. It wasn't... I don't think I missed anything in this. It was just bad. Next book is another sequel that disappointed me. And so it was the sequel to The Last Name Sarah by Kristen Ciccarelli? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Called The Caged Queen, I believe. This book I kind of liked. I had a hard time getting into it, but there were dragons in it, and I was very interested in continuing on with the dragon plot that happened in this book. And the second book just followed a completely different set of characters with a completely different plot. And it wasn't bad, it's just not what I wanted. I continued on with the series because I wanted more dragons, and there were no dragons in the second book. It was just a whole different story that was building up, I guess, the main plot, but I think would have been better if we had just gone back and forth, like chapter by chapter with different characters across the span of the 2 books instead of giving them each their own book. I picked this book up because dragons, I wanted to continue with the series because dragons, and no dragons. I was disappointed. I will not be continuing with that series. I was just left feeling betrayed by no dragons. Number 4 on my list is The Wicked Saints by Emily A. Duncan. I don't have a copy of the book. I definitely picked this up because it was just a really pretty cover, and I thought the plot sounded intriguing enough. I'm going off memory here. Russian-inspired fantasy with a lot of saint magic, and I thought the magic system was really cool. Like, this main character can call upon saints to wield magic. And then there's also other people wielding blood magic, and there's a war, and I thought it sounded interesting, but I was bored through most of the book. The magic system started falling apart and becoming just broader and less intricate as we learned more about it. And it was like almost the dark edginess of it, like it was trying too hard. I didn't care about any of the characters. I wanted to like this book so much, but I just didn't. Number 5 on this list is A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, I don't even know. It's a classic book. I will admit, I barely read this book. I skimmed through, partway through the rest of the book, and then went online and read a explanation chapter by chapter of what the hell I was reading. And it's a very difficult book to read. It was definitely just an issue of me not caring enough to want to translate and struggle through this book, because the characters use a lot of their own slang, and it's like heavily so that you start to pick up on it as you read, but it's still very difficult to decipher. Yeah, I did. It was garbage. I'm saying it. It was garbage. I didn't like it. I think if I'd actually been able to study it and worked through it, I might have found more merit in it, but as someone wanting to casually read it, no. To move on to a more positive side of the video, I'd like to talk about my favorite books of the year, and there's also 5 on this list, so unbeknownst to me, I somehow made 5 and 5. Didn't intend for that, it just worked out beautifully. I literally just went through and picked my absolute favorite, definitely want to recommend books of the year. So the next one on the list is more of a series recommendation than just a single book, and that is A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan, and it's the Memoir of Lady Trent series. And so we follow a woman set in a sort of fantasy world, and I think it's supposed to be the 18th century, might be the 19th, where she's trying to become a natural historian of dragons, which exist in this world, and she wants to study the biology and the zoological sort of aspects of these creatures, but she's a woman in a very typical 18th, 19th century England, where women don't have the agency to go and do things on their own. And so it follows her struggling through the societal issues and becoming, she eventually becomes a little more famous and has a little more freedom to go on different journeys, but they are journey memoirs of her studying dragons. The covers are definitely what got me onto them at first, and then also dragons. They were so good. They took a twist that I wasn't expecting right at the end of the series, and oh, I adore these books. The characters are everything. There are dragons. The world building is gorgeous. I'd say the first book does start off a tad bit slow, but they're really, really quite phenomenal. I did listen to a couple of them on audiobook, which was such a great choice. They are great on audiobook, but the books themselves actually have illustrations throughout them, so I think they're definitely worth sort of picking up and going through for that. I adored this series, would recommend it. Every book got 5 stars from me. It's not really heavy. I think it's a great series for someone to go into that wants to dip their toes into fantasy but doesn't handle heavy, dense world-building fantasy very much. So the next book I want to mention is the final book in a trilogy by Kiersten White, and I don't know if the series had its own name, but the first book was called And I Darken. I don't own a copy of the third book, unfortunately, but I read that in 2018, and it was, this whole series is just solid and gorgeous and well thought out and intricate, and the characters, it was sort of painted as a fantasy. I know a lot of people, when they were first talking about it, referred to the series as a fantasy. It's not. It's historical, imagined fiction. It's about, basically, if Vlad the Impaler was a woman, and then we also follow her brother. So we start the book off with them in childhood, and then across the series we see them grow up. It's a survey across their lives sort of book. We are following Lada, and who is supposed to be Vlad, and Radu, her brother, and so we get 2 sides, and they start off going through life together, but then they divide, and there's just so much beautiful growth of both of these characters across their lives, and it's done so tastefully and so well timed out. It doesn't feel like anything's rushed or anything's too slow. It's a slow burn book, but it doesn't feel like it's dragging. It's just a very, very character-driven series, and the final book was a stunning, very solid conclusion. Like, I don't feel like anything was missing in this conclusion. It was beautiful and everything I wanted, and I definitely cried a lot by the end of the series. Number 3 on my list is Darius the Great Is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. I read this toward the beginning of the year. I listened to it on an audiobook actually, and it was such a beautiful story that centered a lot on family and self-discovery, mental health, friendship, and we follow our main character Darius and his visit with his family to visit extended family in Iran. And he doesn't feel like he's Persian enough, he doesn't know his culture, he doesn't know the language, so he's struggling with being too American and trying to understand his family and connect with his culture. Number 4 on the list is Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazemian. I'm so sorry, I still have not looked up how to pronounce your name. But it was a historical fiction set in the late 80s in New York, following 3 characters, sort of as they deal with their lives amidst the AIDS crisis. We have 2 gay characters and 1 straight female character, and I don't want to get too into describing it again. It was just such a gorgeous book that, above all, like, the plot with the characters was amazing, but the call and the cry for queer people in particular, but for everybody to learn queer history, was so powerful. And how it dealt with the AIDS crisis. Anything I've read about the AIDS crisis is very depressing. It's very sad. It definitely highlights the grief and devastation of the time. But this one finds sparks of hope and power and courage throughout this. And I think overall, above all, it connects that chunk of history, that time, the people that lived through that, with the people of today. By giving us teen characters that are living through it, young readers that are reading this book are connected in a way to what happened in such a way that I've never seen before. It puts them there in that place and allows them to explore and understand the sheer devastation of the AIDS crisis to the queer community. But not only that, but what they did to combat it and stand up against the complete lack of action that was taken by governments and by people in power. I don't want to say like it's a more positive spin, but it finds life, I think, is really what happens. It finds life amongst such a dark, desolate time. Actually, I lied. I do have a copy of it. Right here. Oops. Anyways, this is what it looks like. Last book I actually don't have to hold up, and that was All American Muslim Girl by Nadine, Jolie, Courtney, and this was a book that it was the last book that I read of 2019, and it was one of my absolute favorites, probably of the decade, and basically it's a contemporary book, a YA contemporary book, following a teenage girl named Allie who is trying to navigate her own identity between being a girl, a young woman, a American citizen, and a Muslim girl. And she's actually starting to learn more about her Muslim religion because her family isn't very religious themselves. They consider themselves, if anything, not outright stated this way, but culturally Muslim. And it was such a beautiful book exploring this complex, sometimes seemingly opposing identity of female and Muslim and American. And she starts dating, there's friendship things, there's a group, a Quranic study group of all girls that are considered vaguely revolutionary for some of the discussions they have about the Quran, about Islam, and about what it means to be a woman in Islam. And it was just such an amazing story. The character development, every conversation was handled so delicately and carefully, but not fragilely. There was definitely opinions given, there was no punches held back. It was just such a powerful book. I'm glad I ended on a happy note because I was feeling all bummed out after the end of the 5 bad books. And these are all just my opinions, blah blah blah, usual spiel. I think overall I had a really good reading year in 2019. There were some bad, but there was a lot of really good and some very excellent books that I read. I look forward to see what I have happening in the future. I'm starting to think that me ending videos is just going to always end with a tongue. I don't know. So, bye.